Hello, everyone. Just past my next slide. I'll just introduce myself very quickly. I'm a software engineer. I've been working in tech for more than 20 years, the majority of my career. I've spent working on a project called Drupal, which is a CMS that was founded 24 years ago. I don't know if there's anyone that works with Drupal or knows Drupal. You can drop a message on chat. I've been mostly working as a technical architect the majority of my career, either leading teams of developers or teams of architects. Currently, I'm a Drupal consultant at the European Commission, and I work on their web projects, the ones that run in Drupal, which is a large majority of the websites of the European Commission. I am Portuguese. I live in Lisbon, in Portugal, and I really like more than tech. I really like history. So this talk will be a mix of technology and history. And today I want to talk to you about a topic that is not very common for us, which is time. I want to talk about two aspects of time in our work. So the first one is how does it affect our work, and the fact that we as software engineers, and this talk will be mostly about software development and how time affects software development. We are not able to create technical legacies. It's very hard for us to build projects that last for more than 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Of course, we cannot aim to build pyramids that last forever, but we should leave something behind us that lasts after we leave projects and can be continued by other generations. And that's not often the case. The second aspect that I want to talk to you in this session is how does time affect our careers and ourselves. And this talk is also inspired by what time does to us. I picked two pictures. The first one is a picture of myself in one of my first work trips. One of the first times I traveled for work. And I went to consult in a client in New York. And back in the day, this was 2011, we were replacing their old ASP.NET CMS, which is used to maintain their websites. We were replacing it with Drupal, and that CMS was been there for a decade. You had people that grow their careers on them, and they were specialists on that technology. So they were not really happy about changing technology to a new one, having to relearn so many things, and having to rebuild many things that they have built in the past. And I remember having one person in the team telling me something that really marked me throughout my career, which was, he told me, be aware that today you are the new cool kid on the block. Everything that you do is hot, and there's a lot of demand for it, but tomorrow you'll be on my position and something else is going to replace you as well. So you need to be prepared for that. And that was something that really marked my career, and something that I always had in mind when I worked in different projects throughout the years. And the second picture is a sign at how time passes. And that's a picture from the cake of the birthday party of Drupal that this year just became 24th. So tomorrow, next year, we'll have the 25th birthday of Drupal. So that's really a sign that things can go very fast and projects evolve a lot. Still, they can become relevant. So I want you to think about this aspect and think about what's your oldest project that you have still running today. Imagine the project you start working on, a technical project that you start working in your career in the past, and it's still running today in some form or another. So think about how many years passed since the original build was done. Think about why is it still running? Think about how many times it changed and how many times it could have died throughout those changes. And think about how many people touched that project since the original build. And we can use the chat to reply. So how many years passed? 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Let's see if we have some replies. Let's see, 10 plus, 15, maybe 20. That's impressive and very rare. 11. 10. Okay. So I've done this session, or I've given this talk a few times, and I can tell you that it's very uncommon to find answers above 15 or 20. 10 we find some, but the most common is between 2 and 5. So how many years can a technical project last, or how much time does the software last? It really depends on what type of software are we talking about. So if you talk about consumer applications or mobile applications that you have running on your phone, those are typically designed to last 2 to 3 years after they are rebuilt. If we think about websites, they can last a bit longer, but it depends on what's their usage. So if you think about business or corporate websites, the typical range goes from 3 to 4 years. If you look to enterprise or government websites, the time starts to increase, 4 to 6 years. Think about commercial or enterprise software that you have to install inside organizations and train people and migrate whenever there is a new version. You start seeing longer times. You start seeing 5 to 10 years of average. And then if you look to embedded or critical mission systems, things that have to be running in a machine or in a car or any sort of device, then you start looking to software that can last more than 20 years. So it really varies, but in any case, if we compare software to other artifacts that other engineering fields do, what we do is it doesn't last a lot of time. If you look to electronic engineering fields, phones and laptops, they are designed to last from 3 to 5 years. If you look to network equipment like routers or switches, 5 to 10 years is the average age. And then if you start looking to electronics, in industrial electronicals, medical devices, control systems, 10 to 20 years, that's the average. If you look to mechanical engineering, cars, which is one of the most common artifacts, they last from 10 to 20 years. The average it's 12 years these days. Civil engineering, buildings can last from 50 to 150 years. Bridges, they last almost 200 years. And finally, if you look to chemical engineering, drug patents, they are designed to last 20 years. Typically afterwards, you have generics appearing. And whenever you have a medical substance, the medical use of that substance is typically 50 to more than 100 years. If you put that in a graph to compare, here are our colleagues from other engineering fields doing bridges and drugs and buildings and cars that last decades and hundreds of years. And here we are building software that typically lasts 2 to 4 years. And the irony of this is that, in theory, if you look to the rest of the artifacts, software is the one that could last indefinitely. There is no physical decay on software. You don't have chemical properties that starts to disappear after some usage. You don't have mechanical friction that causes damages on software. But in practice, from all the others, we are the first ones to die all the time. And why do we die? Well, several reasons. The first one and more evident is when the software starts to be useful for the business. So there's no more need, there's no more appetite for the software. It dies. But most of the case, that's not the reason why software dies. Technology, users, and the way that software changes is typically what makes software die. So technology, when your software is made of different dependencies or external services, and you depend of other libraries or you depend of other services, they typically die first than your software. And when they die, you die with them. Software is made to run in certain language versions, in certain operating systems. And when those die, then the software that was built for them dies as well. And when they die, then there's time for security vulnerabilities to appear, and that's when your software stops to be supported, and therefore, sooner or later, it will going to die. Users are always expecting new things from software. The expectations from users evolve over time, and the look and feel of a website is something that changes frequently. That's one of the reasons why websites end up dying and rebuilds are done. It's because a fresher look is done. But sometimes some trends appear and users have expectations of interacting with your software in a different way. Something that we have built 5, 10 years ago was probably not prepared to deal with chatbots or dealing with voice bots. And therefore, if your software doesn't follow the trends and doesn't follow user expectations on how to interact with it, sooner or later it will going to die. And then software requires changes over time, and the way that those changes are made in software, it's what make it last or die. If whenever it's needed to do a change in your software, it cracks like a cast of cards, or whenever it's done, you need to do a new functionality in your software, it costs more to do that change in your current version than to do a full rebuild, then your software is going to die. And finally, software dies whenever the community that can support it is so scarce that whenever you need to do a change, you need to wait for a single code wizard that is the only person in the world that knows how to interact with that component or with that part of the software. Then it's likely that the software is going to die because there's too much dependency on a single person. However, we do have examples from technology and from projects and software projects that really doesn't follow this rule, and you have projects that have been there for decades. They're still relevant today. I picked 3 examples. First one, Linux was founded 34 years ago in 1991. It powers it empowers the majority of the web servers in the world, runs in a large majority of phones in the world. Anyone and every company can contribute to Linux, fostering its evolution across different industries, across different use cases. That's one of the reasons why Linux evolved and kept being so relevant. No single company can kill it. Another example, not really a software project, but a technological project, Wikipedia became the de facto source of truth for many things that we search online. It doesn't rely on a single staffing model or a single funding model. You have different contributors that can join and help evolve topics and pages in Wikipedia. And there are different funding models in Wikipedia that made it relevant and made it sustainable to evolve over time and be relevant 24 years later. And finally, Git is the youngest of all these projects. Git was founded in 2005, so that's 20 years ago. It adopted from the beginning a distributed model, which allows everyone to fork and keep history of software projects and keep evolving them. Git is the base stone where majority of technical projects and software is kept in code repositories in 2025, and it fits perfectly with the open source contribution mindset. And that's the reason why it became so popular. At the same time, those properties doesn't make it by itself enough for a project to last. I picked 3 counterexamples of projects that also had those properties, but they didn't last. SourceForge was back in the day the place to distribute software. However, its poor governance and the way that monetization decisions were taken put the community away, and people start choosing other ways to distribute software. Git services became way more popular than SourceForge. OpenOffice was very popular, but the community fragmented. With that, the innovation slowed. You had less contributions and less users. And finally, Second Life was very popular 20 years ago. But close governance and the way that monetization strategy were followed also restrict innovation. The community ended up drifting to solutions that were not technically as evolved, but were simply to use and to own then Second Life. In common with all the ones that succeeded, I picked three things. So they don't have a single point of failure, so they can survive beyond a single company and a single leader. And with that, they can survive beyond the hype. When you have a project starting, there's a lot of hype about it, a lot of people joining. But if the leadership does not transition over time and you don't have new leaders emerging, then it's hard to maintain that hype over time, and it's hard to keep consistency around the community. At the same time, ownership evolves over time. The community in the end is the one that should own a project. And the community in the end is going to be the one that is going to keep it updated, keep it innovative, and is the one that creates incentives for the evolution. When your product becomes the infrastructure and not only a product, when you have a big community that bases their business on your product, then your product becomes their infrastructure. And with that, you have more probabilities that the project is going to last because there's too many people involved on it in terms of ownership. And finally, foundations are important when you start a technical project, and foundations can evolve over time. Governance can evolve when projects are scaled, but it's important that trust is maintained across those evolutions, and what brought originally the community to the product is kept over time, and the values are maintained. And that's valid for all the projects that I've discussed before. Now I want to talk about another project, which is the one that is closer to my heart, which is Drupal. So Drupal, for the ones that don't know, it's a CMS written in or started in 2001 by a Belgian engineer called Dries Buytaert. He created originally Drupal to support a message board that he had back in university, and then released as an open source software in January 2001. And since then, Drupal became one of the most common ways to build websites and one of the most popular PHP frameworks. So from January 2001 to today, we have about 9,000 days. If you want to read that better as a human, that's 24 years, 8 months, and 4 days. So that's a long time. And of course, Drupal was never the same. I think we can divide it in three historical ages. The first one, lasting 5 years, is the early days of the project. That's from Drupal 1.0 until Drupal 4.7. The community was very small, but you could find in the foundations of Drupal many concepts that made it popular and that are still popular today. Anyone working with Drupal through its career has been exposed to these, and it's still today the same basic concepts that are behind Drupal. So the notion of hooks, which is basically a way to hook into your core and extend it without having to touch or patch the core of the software, it was there since the beginning, so since version 1. Then the notion of models or plugins and themes, the way that you can customize your functionality and distribute that functionality and package that functionality is there since version 2. The way that you organize content in nodes and comments and blocks and menus, it's pretty much the same since 2002 as well. The notion that you have a maintenance.txt file, which is a file where it's described who is responsible, who are the responsible individuals per different components. It's there from early on, since 2003. So you have different people that are responsible for the node model, or there are different people that are responsible for the theming system since early days. Then came the the age where Drupal became more popular, and that's from 2007 to 2015. So Drupal 5 to Drupal 7. And here you start seeing more complex subsystems appearing, things like the database layer, the way that you organize your information in fields, the caching layer, the usage of external dependencies, such as jQuery. In this age, you start seeing a larger community, and you start seeing the community relying on external integrations to grab the best of Drupal to put it above the competition. So you start seeing Drupal integrating with Varnish, with Memcache, with Apache Solaire. You start seeing big contributed models that ended up a few years later in core, such as views, CCK, rules, organic groups. Some of those became so popular that went into core. The others became so popular that was never abandoned after that. Back to these days, until 2015, Drupal had a release cycle that was when it's ready, we release. So it was impossible to expect a date of release from Drupal because the mantra was when it's ready, we're going to release. And that changed also in the future, and that was one of the reasons why it became more trustable as well. So that brought us to 2015 when Drupal 8 was released. Drupal 8 was a big shift in Drupal in terms of the product and in terms of the community. And today we are in Drupal 11, which is an evolution, a natural evolution from 2015. So since then, Drupal became way more dependent on external components, mostly from Symfony. The templating system became the de facto to be used Twig. You start having better subsystems and more evolved directly into core. So multilingual, configuration management, all of that became into core. Drupal started to be used not only to do websites, but also to expose information on the web via web services, for instance. So you start having REST APIs and web services into core. And since 2015, Drupal changed the release strategy, and there is a fixed release cycles. So the community knows when Drupal 11 is going to be released, when Drupal 11.1 is going to be released, and there's a fixed release cycle of every 6 months. There's a minor release, and there's a fixed release cycle for the majors as well. So it's way easier to plan upgrades ahead due to those dates. Time helps find the space. That's true for humans, and that's true for software as well. So as I told you, Drupal started as a message board project in 2001. Fast forward 10 years, Drupal was used. It was one of the easiest ways to have a manageable website with a CMS. So in 2010, you see a lot of Drupal websites that were just blogs and personal websites maintained by enthusiasts. In 2015, Drupal was very popular to do many types of websites. You see Drupal doing internets, doing community websites, doing corporate websites, doing still personal websites. It was almost like a Swiss Army knife for the web. So it was used for many use cases, even if sometimes there were easier ways to build those websites. With Drupal 8, in 2020, Drupal was mostly focusing on the enterprise. So Drupal is used for complex digital experiences, complex websites, government websites, universities, those type of clients that require more control on their content, and it became a bit more complex to build those websites. But at the same time, the end result of those websites, their quality in terms of software, grow a lot, and that also changed the community working with Drupal. And today we are still in the same time, even if there are projects made in the last years to make Drupal easier to use for marketeers, make Drupal easier to use for simple websites through new projects, namely Drupal CMS, which tries to go back in time and give back some of the usage of Drupal to people that are not always software engineers and can build sites without knowing anything about software development. So I wanted to go through a few ideas on how to make software projects last longer, and a few principles that I think are always valid in any type of software project. And I divided it on understanding the time, what to set in foundations of your project to make it last, what to pay attention in terms of tests and documentation to make it last, and how to address changes, refactors, and releases so that it's trustable and can be used by a longer period. So the first aspect is, how do you think about time in a software project? Typically, we think about the time on a software project on the time that we spent originally building it. Let's say that it lasts 3 months to build it. That's very common for software projects. But in reality, the time that we're going to spend on using it, on refactoring, on upgrading it, it's going to be much longer. You can think about 5 years. It's a typical duration for a software project. So it's more about not thinking only about the project and the fact that you are working on a project for 3 months, but about the product that you'll be working on during 5 years. And I think that this change of mindset from project to product, it's one of the reasons why it's easier to find products that are well maintained if you have teams that work with them for a longer time, and they will need to maintain it and refactor it and follow the consequences of what is built originally in the foundation of the project. In terms of foundations, I divided it in 4 vectors. So the first one is scope. And typically when a project is starting, there's a lot of ideas, but it's important to make it, its scope, its core, smaller, the better. It's very easy to get the scope right if it's smaller. It can always iterate after. In any case, the scope, if the project is successful, is going to change over time. So make sure that your core is small, prepare it for expansion, make sure that it can be expanded through different ways that you are not expecting on day one, but make sure that the core itself is small and is not filled with things that are just good extras. Users are going to be the owners of your product sooner or later. The ecosystem is going to own your product sooner or later. So the earliest that you expose your project and your product to its users, the earliest you get feedback and the earliest you can pass ownership from your original idea to your users. One of the most important aspects in terms of foundation is the way that you capture and the way that you model your data. Data is usually the hardest thing to go back in time and change. And data is what, throughout the evolution of your project and your product, it's what you're going to carry since the beginning. It's going to be your biggest weight, it's data. So make sure that if you have to spend time on the foundation of your project, make sure that you spend as much time as possible modeling data and thinking about how your data is going to be modeled. If you get this wrong now, it will be very hard to change that in the future. Architecture is something, nevertheless, that is easier to change in the future. You can change your architecture, you can change your components, you can change your dependencies. That's something that you can change over time. But make sure that since the beginning, those components and these different subsystems are as loosely coupled as possible, so they can be easier to replace whenever its time comes. Make sure that you balance correctly the amount of code that you write and you own versus the amount of code and services that you depend. As I mentioned before, I think that external dependencies and external services are likely to die faster than the code that you can write and you can still restructure. So make sure that you balance that dependency set very well. because typically it will die before than your code. Testing is as important as your code. But if you don't have a way to guarantee that your product keeps working after you do changes, then you'll be always very afraid of changing it. The only way to guarantee that if it keeps working is by retesting it from scratch. So software without test, of course, it's cheaper to build, but in the long run, it's always more expensive to maintain and more likely to die if there's no testing coverage from the most important of your features. If you don't have an automatic testing suite that you can trust, and if you don't have an automatic test suite that is run frequently, that you know that is still relevant to the functionality of software, and that you can compare to changes that you have done in your software, then it will be very hard to maintain trust on your project. So tests should exist. Tests should have the coverage that gives you the trust, and tests should run frequently. So then you know that your project keeps working, and as time passes and dependency changes and things changes, your project keeps working. At the same time, documentation is important to guarantee that knowledge is passed, knowledge is maintained. Typically, when you look to code and when you are looking to refactor it, you think about these three questions. How a certain feature was done in the code. So how is this done in code? Why was it done? When was it done? And is it still needed? Look to what I'm going to refactor today. A few suggestions. We are never the same when we come back to the code that we wrote in the past. Sometimes we are not the ones that get back to the code that we wrote. Sometimes it's some other colleague that will inherit that code and will need to support it. So documentation code should be as close as possible, should be simple to look through the code and understand what gave origin to that code, why things were done in that way, when were things done, and what was the context that it was done. So make sure that your project history, your commit history can get you that information. Make sure that your commit messages and your merge requests are relevant with and are filled with relevant information that can get you that context. That's typically more important than to understand how something is done and document the whole code. Time passes by your code and requests start to arrive to change your code and your project. The way that you address those changes is going to mark the way that that project is going to last. Whenever change is requested, it's always a good idea to do a reality check and understand if that change is an opportunity to refactor a bit more than just that change. So it's always a balance between be lazy and just do the small change that I've been asked to, or be bold and do what is needed to make the project simpler and better, or go out of scope and due to a small change have to refactor many things that in the end can get you fired. So it's always hard to get that balance, but try to be bold as many times as possible. Finally, refactor and release. Every refactor window that you get, every release opportunity that you get is a chance to make your project simpler, and you should use it. You should take use of it. Plan releases ahead and give expectations on dates to people. That helps people understanding the timeline, makes easier to make plans on depending on your product, and it's easier for people to plan their dependencies on your project. Prepare for maturity. It's usually a good idea to roll out new releases or big changes in a gradual rollout that goes from alpha, betas until things are stable enough to make a stable release. That also helps early releases to get more feedback and people to be prepared for the final result of the final stable release as something that got battle tested before. It's also a good opportunity in every release. it's always a good opportunity to bring it closer to the upstream of your dependencies. So imagine that you are depending on Symfony components, then every release and every major release, it's always a good opportunity to be closer to the upstream major version of that Symfony component, for instance. So that was about software and about code, and that's just part of the equation. The second part is ourselves. This is a picture from last year, Mautic in Lisbon, and we are here today. We were here through the whole week, but we won't be here Sunday, and we need to be prepared for Sunday. We need to make sure that our projects and our applications keep running on Sundays when we are not there. Successful projects are the ones that have a large ecosystem and a large contributor base that can keep it running when some maintainers step away and are not involved as they were in the past in the project. Make it easier to jump in the project and spread the knowledge. It's important to keep a project relevant and lasting over time. The way that time passes by us also impacts how do we position ourselves. So we usually start as juniors. We don't have any legacy to carry. We start careers with a learning mindset. In the beginning of our careers, we are not responsible for any mission critical systems. We are not responsible for deployments. We are not responsible for releasing things in production. So we have more freedom to experiment. We start our careers after leaving boot camps or universities, and these places usually emphasize how you should be learning new things and what is hot right now and what is latest and greatest. So that's one of the reasons why juniors have more tendency to work on technology that is fresh and new and with more hype in the present. However, as time goes by and as you became more senior, you start to be more invested in older stacks. You have less time to experiment with new technology because you are just busy with releasing things into production and teaching new people on your team, reviewing the code, handling all the production issues that you have on a daily basis. So you don't have the time to just sit and learn new things as easy as you had in the past. You also became more comfortable with what you know, and you tend to work on things that you have more knowledge and are better paid because of that. So there's a bit of skepticism towards hype, and there's less exposure to new technologies and to learnings of new technologies. That's just the nature of the position. A few suggestions in terms of how to make the time pass easier by you as you grow in your or as you spend more time in your career. Typically, you don't create a legacy when you start your career. You create a legacy when you have a bit more experience. And engineers that create legacy when they adapt the principles that they learn in the past in other projects and in other positions, and they're able to use those principles to guide them in new ways. It's impossible as an engineer to catch every good wave in technology, but that's not really the challenge. The challenge is whenever you catch a new wave and you start working on something new, is how do you bring what you learned in the past and what you worked on the past as valuable to the new wave that you are riding right now. For that, it's important to keep learning, keep on learning through problems, not through theory. And at the same time, instead of leverage tools and value tools, what we should value is principles, and those are typically not gone after a project is gone. And I think it's important that we don't forget that it's easier to go fast if you are alone, but if you want to create legacy and if you want to last in time, you need to go together and you need to create a community with you. That's what makes you spend more time in a project and then if you have gone fast and alone. So finally, Coming back to the example I was giving about Drupal, did it pass the test of time? I think it's hard to say that it didn't when it has been in the industry and is so relevant as it is still today after 24 years. A few examples of what I mentioned in the past that I think Drupal can be seen as a good guiding principle on how it did pass the test of time. There was a lot of things that were experienced first outside of Drupal core, and then were brought into core in a way more mature state as if they have been built originally into core. That made core more resilient over time, and whatever was brought in was always more tested than originally the original state. Drupal was never the same in terms of standards and in terms of the quality of the code. It's evolved a lot over time, but at the same time that there was evolution, there was always an evolution in terms of standards, and the quality that you see today is definitely better than what you saw 10, 15 years ago. And the fact that the expected dates for releases and the fact that the release cycle was changed was fundamental to enforce trust and make it used in people that and in projects and in companies that really depend on mission critical CMS for their websites. I think Drupal did a very good job on preferred together instead of fast, adopted external dependencies and dropped many things that were core of Drupal, were written by Drupal core maintainers with a lot of effort and could have been better done by just relying on external dependencies and external projects. And that was something that was started to be done 10, 15 years ago, and that was a success. And Drupal did a good job on dropping what was not needed anymore and dropping its past when it needed. At the same time, in terms of people and in terms of the last part of our equation, replacing key members over time was fundamental. Drupal ended up empowering many careers of people that start working with Drupal and don't work with Drupal anymore, but its exposure to the project was pivoted to their careers and their careers in web development and in software development overall. So I think that's definitely one of the key reasons to pass the test of time. To finish, we cannot talk about time without thinking about what the future will bring us. And I've asked ChatGPT to tell me what the future website will look like. And of course, ChatGPT gave me a super answer, considering that the website will be an adaptive, AI-driven, immersive layer of reality that lasts because it bends with human needs. But in reality, it's very hard to predict what's going to be the future of the web. We don't know if there will be websites, and we don't know how people are going to interact with them. We don't know what it will take to create a website and how difficult it will be for a non-software engineer to create a website. And most over, we don't know when is our web legacy going to die, for how long those websites that we build are going to exist, and when they are going to start dying. So it's pretty much impossible to answer to these questions today, but if I had to bet on something, I would stick to the basics. I would keep it simple, keep the core of what we build simple, but design always change in mind and prepare our core to be changeable in the future. Build a community, not only a product, and that is valid whatever you are building. An open source project is valid if you are building a software to be used inside the organization. If it's true, if you are building a personal project, you need a community behind the project for it to last. You should prioritize standards. Those are the ones that make it easier to migrate to new technologies and to interrupt your data with other components in the future. Governance can be evolved as you scale, but as long as you focus on the key principles and maintain trust, then you are better positioned to last longer than if not. And finally, you need to adapt. Just a final confession. This was the first time that every slide I created, I had asked ChatGPT to give me new routes and avenues to explore some of these ideas. And I think this was also a change on the way that I can create presentations, and I can develop a topic, and that's a sign of adapting. And with that, I think I finished right on time. I hope I didn't waste your time. And I don't know if we do have time for questions. If so, I guess you can ask in chat.
Thank you so much, Hernani. You did an amazing job. Can I see our emojis? Let's drop our emojis so that we can show our massive support to Hernani. The best part is after Hernani's talk, it is time for lunch. So we're getting there. We're getting there. Okay, so do we have any questions for Hernani? Let's drop it in the chat section. Let's drop it in the chat. Yeah. I love how you broke down the concept of time, time in relation to tech, time in relation to careers. So, my question is for those of, I'm not yet a senior person, I hope to get there soon, but some of us who are in the audience, they are like senior professionals. What would you recommend to them in terms of trying out new tools? Because you had mentioned in your talk that one of the consequences of familiarity with a particular tool or tech stack or software is they're not willing and able to try something new compared to people who are just starting out. They are willing and able to take risks to try many things before getting conversant with one. So for senior people, especially in the marketing team, or senior coders or senior developers, saying as we have like an array of people in our audience, what advice would you give to them? Yeah.
I think, yeah, there's different ways to get exposure to new technologies. I think it's easier to get exposure through if you are if you pay attention to the market and if you follow what is normal in conferences, for instance. But in the end, I think you end up only learning when you try and you work directly into those technologies. So I think it's always important to find opportunities throughout the year inside organizations, inside where you work, to test new tools, new technologies, maybe not in the core of your product, maybe not in what is in production, but find opportunities inside to work in smaller projects, in MVPs, in projects that you can spike a development of a few weeks, and gets you exposure to new technologies. And then, of course, if you do have space outside of your professional time to work on personal projects, then those are typically the ones that can expose you to other technologies. So if you work, let's imagine my case, if I work in Drupal full time during my daily job, then I'll probably pick something else to work on my outside time or personal time if I want to try out a new technology and geek about something. I think having personal projects and have personal hobbies in technology outside of your professional full-time paid job, it's always a good opportunity to learn new things.
All right. Thanks for sharing this, Hernani. Okay, I see we have a question. We have a question from Ricardo. So Ricardo is asking if you believe Drupal will remain relevant in the long run, or will WordPress take the lead?
I think both Drupal and WordPress suffer from the same challenges these days. There's a big challenge on the web, which is the drop of traffic to websites. You have less traffic on websites because people are just asking questions to search engines or chatbots, and they're getting what they are looking for directly on the chatbot. So you end up having less traffic on the web, on the websites. You start having less revenue on those websites. So those websites tend to be seen for, or to have less content. I think WordPress and Drupal have their own space. WordPress gained a lot of market, especially in simple sites, but also has a lot of competition from other products, especially SaaS options that allow you to build a website with a few prompts these days. So they suffer from the same challenges, but at the same time, they are still, if you want to have an independent web presence that you can fully control and you can um, not be dependent of any external vendor and want to have an independent web, then projects like Drupal and WordPress are relevant today and will be relevant in the future because they will guarantee there is independence on the web that doesn't depend on big companies to just harvest data from the web and show it to the audience that they choose.
All right. Thank you so much for your question, Ricardo. I can see something in the chat. Okay. Ricardo says, thank you. Do we have any other questions, or we will be we'll be rounding up on this? All right then. So thank you so much for our active participation. Thank you, Hernani, for sharing your insight. I don't think I realized the impact that time has on software or tools or processes that we use. For bringing this to our conscious understanding, it's timely, particularly in this age of AI and the rapidly evolving tools, processes, as well as even policies. Yeah.